Something important is quietly shaping the Detroit Lions offseason, and it revolves around a position that often doesn't get the spotlight, but is absolutely critical to everything this team wants to accomplish moving forward: the offensive tackle situation. With the NFL's negotiating window for pending free agents set to open on March 9th, and players officially able to sign with new teams on March 11th at 4 p.m., the Lions are already evaluating their options and preparing for what could be a pivotal moment in shaping the offensive line for both the present and the future. One of the biggest pieces of news for Detroit came when Taylor Decker announced his intention to delay retirement and return for another season. For Lions fans, that decision immediately stabilized one of the most important positions on the roster. Decker has been a cornerstone of the offensive line for years, protecting the blind side and providing leadership in the locker room. By choosing to come back for another year, he essentially solved what could have been an urgent problem for Detroit heading into this offseason. But even with that good news, the situation isn't completely settled. Last season, Decker dealt with a shoulder issue that proved to be stubborn and difficult to manage. While he fought through it, the injury raised a legitimate concern about depth and durability moving forward. The Lions may feel confident about Decker starting again, but the reality is they still need reliable insurance behind him. Offensive line depth becomes incredibly important over the course of a long season, and Detroit knows it can't afford to be caught unprepared if injuries strike again. On the other side of the line, things look far more secure thanks to Penei Sewell. Sewell has firmly established himself as one of the most dominant right tackles in football and remains a long-term pillar for the franchise. His presence gives Detroit tremendous stability on the right side, and the organization clearly views him as a foundational piece of the offensive line for years to come. What makes Sewell even more valuable is the flexibility he provides. If and when Decker eventually steps away from the game, Sewell has the ability to slide over and take over the left tackle role. That possibility is something the Lions are undoubtedly considering as they map out the long-term future of the line. Having a player capable of handling either side at an elite level gives Detroit options, and that flexibility could influence how aggressively they pursue tackles in free agency or the draft. Depth, however, is where things become more complicated. Veteran swing tackle Dan Skipper was forced into retirement because of injury, leaving a gap in the Lions' depth chart. Skipper had been a valuable piece as a versatile backup who could step in when needed. Losing that experience means Detroit now has to identify new solutions behind their starters. Another name to watch is Jamarco Jones, who is heading toward free agency. Jones had an opportunity to compete for the primary backup role last season after showing strong promise during training camp. Unfortunately, those plans were derailed before the season even began when he suffered a torn Achilles ahead of the opener. Instead of contributing on the field, he spent the year recovering, and now his future with Detroit remains uncertain as he approaches the open market. Then there's Giovanni Manu, the Lions' 2024 fourth-round pick, who is still very much part of the developmental plan. Manu saw his first game action last season, and the expectation now is that he takes a significant step forward. The coaching staff will likely give him a real chance to compete for the top backup tackle role. If his development accelerates, he could even start positioning himself for something bigger down the road. In fact, there's already a sense that 2027 could be a realistic timeline for him to push into starting consideration if everything progresses the way the Lions hope. So when you step back and look at the full picture, Detroit's offensive tackle situation is a mix of short-term stability and long-term planning. The return of Taylor Decker buys time, Penei Sewell remains a dominant presence, and younger players like Giovanni Manu represent future possibilities. But the depth chart still has questions, and with free agency approaching quickly, the Lions front office has to decide whether to reinforce the position with outside talent or trust the internal development already underway. And that leads to a bigger question about the strategy behind the scenes in Detroit. Are the Lions preparing to bring in outside help to strengthen the tackle room immediately? Or do they believe the pieces already in the building can step up and fill those roles as the team pushes toward another competitive season? What do you think, Lions fans? Should Detroit prioritize adding another offensive tackle in free agency for security, or trust the development of the players already on the roster? If the Lions decide they want additional security at the tackle position, the upcoming free agent market could present several intriguing possibilities. None of these these options come without risk, but each brings a different skill set and level of experience that could fit what Detroit might be looking for as they balance immediate depth with long-term flexibility. One of the more interesting names expected to hit the market is Rasheed Walker. Walker entered the league as a 7th-round pick out of Penn State in 2022, and at the time, many people viewed him as more of a developmental prospect than a future starter, but things changed quickly once he stepped into a bigger role. Since taking over the starting job in Green Bay in 2023 following David Bakhtiari's departure from the lineup, Walker has steadily developed into a dependable presence on the edge. Over the past 2 seasons, he has allowed just 8 sacks, which is a strong number for a young tackle who has been facing top pass rushers every week. His pass protection is considered his strongest trait, though his run blocking still has room to grow. For a team like Detroit that values versatility and steady protection up front, Walker could represent a younger option with upside if he reaches the market. Another veteran option who might draw attention is Braden Smith. When Smith is healthy, he has proven to be one of the better right tackles in the league, especially in the running game where he has delivered several dominant seasons. Over the past 3 years, he has allowed just 5.0 sacks across 45 games, which highlights his effectiveness when he's on the field. The problem, however, has been durability. Smith has finished 4 of the past 5 seasons on injured reserve, and last season ended with him missing the final weeks because of a neck injury and concussion. That kind of medical history is something any team would have to evaluate carefully, especially one like Detroit that already dealt with injury concerns along the line last year. Versatility could also play a major role in how the Lions evaluate potential additions, and that's where Jermaine Eluemunor becomes interesting. Over the course of his 9-year career, Eluemunor has lined up at multiple positions, including right tackle, left tackle, and right guard. His most extensive work has come at right tackle, and he started 16 games for the Giants last season. As a pass protector, he's generally considered reliable, but penalties have been an issue. Over the past 2 seasons, he has been flagged 24 times, which is something coaching staffs always look closely at when evaluating offensive linemen. Then there's Braxton Jones, who entered the league as a 5th-round pick in 2022 and immediately earned the starting left tackle job as a rookie. Over the last 4 seasons, he has made 44 starts and shown gradual improvement as a pass protector while contributing solidly in the run game. However, injuries have interrupted his progress in each of the past 3 seasons. Last year also brought another challenge when his performance dipped early in the season while playing under offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, eventually leading to him being benched. Those factors could affect his value on the open market, but they might also create an opportunity for a team willing to bet on his upside. Another name worth mentioning is Jonah Williams, a former 1st-round pick who entered the league with high expectations. Early in his career with Cincinnati, Williams struggled at times, including seasons where he allowed double-digit sacks. In 2024, he signed with Arizona, but injuries again limited his availability. Over the last 2 seasons, he has played only 15 games due to knee and shoulder issues. Still, Williams brings significant experience, having logged more than 5,000 snaps in his career and spending over 2,000 snaps at both left tackle and right tackle. That kind of positional flexibility is extremely valuable for teams looking for depth across the offensive line. There are also potential lower-cost options who could fit the Lions' roster construction strategy. Joseph Noteboom is one such player. Noteboom was originally drafted by the Rams, while Lions general manager Brad Holmes was serving as the team's college scouting director, which means there is already some familiarity there. Over his career from 2018 through 2024, Noteboom moved in and out of the starting lineup in Los Angeles. Injuries prevented him from fully living up to the 3-year, $40 million contract extension he signed in 2022, but his versatility remains appealing. He has played snaps at all 4 tackle and guard spots, with most of his experience coming at left tackle. He's generally regarded as a stronger run blocker than pass protector, and could be a relatively affordable swing tackle option. Another versatile depth piece is Jahmyr Gibbs. While he has spent most of his time at right guard during his career, Gibbs has also logged significant snaps at tackle. As a rookie, he played more than 1,000 snaps at tackle, and late last season, he made 5 starts on the blind side. That kind of positional flexibility could make him an attractive option for teams that value linemen capable of moving around depending on injuries or matchup needs. When you connect all these pieces, it becomes clear that Detroit's front office has multiple paths it could take. The Lions could pursue a proven veteran to strengthen their depth immediately. They could target a younger player with upside who might grow into a bigger role over time, or they could simply trust the internal development of players like Giovanni Manu while relying on their current starters to anchor the unit. What's certain is that the offensive line remains one of the most important foundations of everything Detroit wants to accomplish. Protecting the quarterback, opening lanes for the running game, and maintaining the physical identity that has defined this team in recent seasons all begin up front. And when you look even deeper into how the Detroit Lions approach roster building, the offensive tackle discussion becomes even more fascinating because it connects directly to the philosophy that has guided this front office over the past few years. General Manager Brad Holmes and the coaching staff have consistently prioritized building from the trenches outward, and the offensive line has been one of the clearest examples of that commitment. The Lions have invested heavily in creating one of the most physical and reliable offensive lines in the league, and that identity has been a major factor in the team's success. Everything from protecting the quarterback to establishing a dominant running game begins with the 5 men up front. That's why even a position that already features stars like Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell still receives so much attention when the offseason arrives. Another layer to consider is timing. The decision by Decker to return for another season essentially buys the Lions a year to continue planning the future of the left tackle position without rushing into a desperate move. That kind of flexibility is extremely valuable. Instead of feeling forced to spend big money in free agency or reach for a player in the draft, Detroit can evaluate the market carefully and decide what type of addition truly fits their long-term plan. For example, if the front office believes that Giovanni Manu can develop into a legitimate contributor, then the priority might shift toward bringing in a veteran swing tackle who can provide short-term insurance while the younger player continues to grow. That type of move would allow the Lions to maintain stability without blocking Manu's potential path to a bigger role down the road. At the same time, the coaching staff will be paying very close attention to how the depth chart develops throughout the offseason program. Competition is something this organization values heavily, and it would not be surprising to see multiple players given opportunities to earn those backup roles. Training camp battles along the offensive line can often determine who becomes the next key contributor when injuries inevitably happen during the season. And that brings up another important point, the reality of the NFL season. No team makes it through an entire year without injuries, especially along the offensive line where the physical demands are constant. That's why the Lions have to think beyond just the starting lineup. Having reliable depth can be the difference between maintaining offensive rhythm or watching the entire unit struggle if one key player goes down. The front office also has to balance the short-term push to remain competitive with the long-term vision of sustaining success. Detroit is no longer rebuilding. The expectations around this team have changed. The Lions are now viewed as legitimate contenders, which means every roster decision carries even more weight. That's why even a move that might seem minor on the surface, like signing a backup tackle or drafting a developmental prospect, can end up playing a critical role later in the season. One injury, one opportunity, and suddenly that depth piece becomes a player the entire offense depends on. So while the spotlight often falls on star players and headline-making moves, the real story of the offseason is often happening quietly in the background. Decisions about depth, development, and future planning are shaping the roster long before the regular season ever begins. And right now, the Detroit Lions appear to be carefully evaluating every possibility at the offensive tackle position as free agency approaches.